In my previous video, I talked about how the NES failed in a lot of markets it tried to enter as a result of so many other companies being established around the globe. In the UK, along with most other countries in Europe, the microcomputer was already king. There were no bloody stupid video game crashes like there was reportedly stateside, which allowed one company to completely monopolise the market. It is really hilarious in retrospect that certain individuals preach the word of the system as being their saviour, when in fact it was the polar opposite scenario. Essentially, one greedy corporate company putting a stranglehold on their market, in which limited choice and diversity in that region. But I suppose, capitalism, eh? Yeah. I found it amusing how my last video appeared to get so many individuals' knickers in a twist. But let's be sensible here. Trying to say that Nintendo saved video gaming in America would be as bodacious as trying to claim that Vince McMahon saved wrestling in the country. And we all know what happened there. Nintendo are not the messiahs, they are very naughty boys, and it is funny how so many people's rose-tinted glasses in the region have now somehow led people to come to the conclusion that the NES was the greatest system of all time. Nostalgia, eh? It's a very powerful drug. These days, some fans in the US are like Nintendo jihadists. Anyway, there is no denying that the NES was a decent system that had a fairly respectable library of games released on the thing, but trying to claim it was the best gaming platform of all time, now, that's just silly. We all really know what platform should receive that crown and accolade. The PlayStation 2, of course! Did you idiots honestly believe that I was going to say it was the ZX Spectrum? Of course bloody not! I am speaking here clearly from a statistical standpoint, of course, unlike some of you loonies in my comment sections. Anyway, speaking of the PS2, in fact, the PS1, 2 and 3 have all outsold the NES, and the PS4 is set to overtake it soon as well. But obviously today isn't about the PlayStation 2, I just wanted to slip that little factoid in to reflect on what a powerful drug nostalgia can be. Today, we're obviously going to be talking about the ZX Spectrum. Yeah! The Sinclair ZX Spectrum is an 8-bit personal home computer, released in the United Kingdom in 1982 by Sinclair Research Limited. The Spectrum was the sequel to the ZX81 and known in development as both the ZX81 Colour and the ZX82. The name Spectrum was given to the Spectrum to highlight that the machine displayed in colour, unlike its black and white predecessor. There were a number of different models of Spectrums released over the platform's life cycle. One would say there was a whole spectrum of Spectrums, 8 in fact in total. These ranged from the 16KB RAM version, released in 1982, right up to the ZX Spectrum Plus 3, with 128KB RAM, released in 1987. Amongst my personal collection, I own boxed versions of the Spectrum Plus and the Spectrum Plus 2. All in all, the ZX Spectrum sold 5 million units worldwide. As I stated in my previous video, the microcomputer market in the UK and Europe was extremely diverse. Amongst it, we had powerful platforms such as the Commodore Amiga and Atari ST, which were as graphically impressive as the 16-bit console generation, which happened a few years later. When we already had impressive platforms about like these, no wonder nothing really stood out about the NES to us Eurofolk. But prior to all of this, it was the Spectrum which was amongst the first mainstream home computers to receive a large audience in the UK. Whilst all this was going on in the United States, they were in the middle of their so-called crash. But on our side of the pond, the ZX Spectrum was one of the first flames to lead to a boom in the gaming market. It wasn't just gaming we can give this system so much credit for either. You could argue it was the platform that launched the whole entire bloody UK IT industry. In fact, the ZX Spectrum was so successful that it ended up earning the creator, Sir Clive Sinclair, a bloody knighthood from the Queen. As I said though, the Spectrum was a simple budget system that paved the way in the UK for the likes of the Commodore 64, the Dragon 32, the BBC microcomputer and the Amstrad CPC 464, just to name a few. All these systems were all competing for a slice of the gaming pie in the early 80s, long before Nintendo or Sega decided to even enter the mix. Over the ZX Spectrum's 10-year life cycle from 1982 to 1992, we saw a whopping 24,000 games released on the platform. Sure, a lot of these titles would have simply been developed in teenage boys' bedrooms, but that was part of the system's charm. There was much more to the gaming scene here in the UK in the 80s than just letting one greedy Japanese corporate company charge you the equivalent of nearly $200 a game in today's money. As I stated in my previous video, when the NES was eventually released in the UK, the games were an absolute fortune and were simply not worth the extortionate amount of money Nintendo were attempting to charge people. All the games on the Spectrum, on the other hand, were much more competitively priced. All were under £10 each, and some games you could get as cheap as £2 each. On top of all of this, you would get given loads of free games, as they would simply come attached to gaming magazines. I bet the Americans didn't get free games attached to issues of Nintendo Power. It was just yet another weapon in Nintendo's brainwashing propaganda arsenal, in which they would use in an attempt to get consumers to spend even more big money on buying their games. Something else that was great about these magazines, and other media on the market at the time, was that they would encourage you to program your own games. These pieces of literature would even give codes in which you could input yourself using BASIC. This is kind of a bit like playing with Lego really, only with symbols and numbers. It's great to play a game in which you inputted for code for yourself. As I stated though earlier, the Spectrum was actually one of the low-budget microcomputers. I myself grew up with an Amstrad CPC 464 instead, which was another British microcomputer. The CPC 464 on the other hand was a lot more technologically advanced, but that's a whole different subject for a whole nother time. Today we are looking at the Spectrum. So, for the sake of getting some more perspective on owning a ZX Spectrum specifically, let's hear from someone who did have one in the 80s. Let's see what the fantastic YouTuber Kim Justice has to say about owning the platform. Yeah!
Now, I could say that as a computer, the Specky allowed you to do a bunch of things that the NES didn't. Do your homework, do your taxes, code, whatever. But that would be bullshit. The Specky was always a games machine, and that was the only reason for its huge success. The amount of people who did their homework on the Specky pales in comparison to those who played Manic Miner, or School Days, or Death Chase, or any one of hundreds of classics. Like the NES, the Specky is a system of ideas, an unbelievable range of games that still scratch almost every possible itch, from great action games to epic adventures to everything in between to some stuff you couldn't even hope to dream of. Now, everyone has a classic nostalgic vision of gaming, sitting on the floor late at night, way too close to the TV, playing for hours, just another game as you're told to go to bed for the 20th time. That was the Spectrum for the UK, just as the NES was for the US. They're not all that different, to be honest. The games were plentiful and the price of admission was cheap. Just a couple of pounds could buy you something great, something that you couldn't get anywhere else. It could also buy you something rubbish that you wouldn't want at all, but that's hardly uncommon. And well, it was ours. A computer that we didn't have to claim as our own, it just was. Back then, that was something to be a bit proud of. There's a certain air of creativity about the Spectrum that always keeps people here, not just during its original decade of existence, but right now. People are still making great Spectrum games, just as they still make great games for the NES. You can do anything you want on a Spectrum, just so long as you work around its limitations. And those limitations that a Spectrum supposedly has, whether it be the colour clash, beeper, or the tiny memory, are again, just like the NES's own limitations, actually what make the machine unique. Because if there weren't any challenges, it wouldn't be any fun. The best systems, when you play them, just build a world all of its own around you no matter what. And unquestionably the Spectrum belongs there. Lord only knows what the world of gaming would look like if it never existed.
So, that was Kim's reasoning for why the Spectrum is, and was, such a fun platform to own. So now we have got someone else's perspective on the platform, let us have a close-up inspection of some of the games for this bloody thing. Probably two of the most iconic games for the system were named School Days and Back to School. It doesn't get much more bloody British than these. These games are representations of the bedroom programming era at its very best. The games were absolutely huge commercial and critical successes. School Days is highly praised for its original concept and is strongly regarded for pioneering the entire sandbox genre of gaming. These games allowed the player to name an entire cast of school characters who obviously you could name after people you actually went to school with. This small touch instantly makes all the characters in the game very relatable. The games are just fresh and fun, even to this day. The objective is to steal your report card out of the staff room safe by accomplishing various tasks around the school. Along the way, if your character is caught out of class, or otherwise misbehaving, the teacher character pursues you and issues you with lines. Get 10,000 lines and it's expulsion for you and game over. Like real school though, the system is a corrupt dictatorship and you can get punished for crimes that are not even your own fault. For example, like being near a teacher who has just been hit by a projectile fired by one of the other pupils. So part of a challenge is simply avoiding other people getting you in trouble. This game is surprisingly accurate, but beats real school any day of the week. Head Over Heels is an arcade adventure video game released in 1987 for several 8-bit home computers and subsequently ported to a wide range of formats including the ZX Spectrum. The game has an isometric perspective similarly to that of the Batman game the developer released a year earlier, and one of my personal favourites, Monster Max, which came out on the Game Boy in 1994. This game innovates the genre as the player controls two characters instead of just one. These two characters, named Head and Heels, have different abilities in which you have to use to progress. Head can jump higher than Heels, control himself in the air, and can fire donuts from a hooter to paralyse enemies, whilst Heels can run twice as fast as Head, climb certain staircases that Head cannot, and carry objects around the room in a bag. The game offers unique and revolutionary gameplay, complex puzzles, and more than 300 rooms to explore. The game is chock full of surreal British touches, including robots that bore a remarkable resemblance to the head of Prince Charles on the body of bloody Daleks. Other bizarre touches include enemies with heads of elephants and staircases made of dogs that teleport themselves away as soon as Head enters the room. Jet Set Willy is a sequel to Manic Miner, published in 1983, and is the second game in the Miner Willy series. It was a significant development in the platform game genre. Jet Set Willy is a flip-screen platform game in which the player moves the protagonist Willy from room to room in his mansion, collecting various objects. The game is a very early example of a non-linear title, since unlike its prequel, Manic Miner, Jet Set Willy on the other hand allows the player to explore the mansion at their own will. Willy is controlled using only left, right and jump. He can climb stairs by walking into them and climb swinging ropes by pushing left or right depending on what direction the rope is swinging. The play area itself consists of 61 screens making up the mansion, and its grounds contain hazards, killer monsters and various platforms and collectible items. The overall goal of the game is to collect the 83 flashing objects littered around this open world platformer. The game was number 1 in the UK Spectrum sales chart for months on end, and the fantastic gameplay has sealed this game's place in platform history and led to literally hundreds of clones of this game. This one is simply brilliant, and who wouldn't want to play as a character wearing a top hat? Yeah! Elite is a space trading video game, published on a number of microcomputers, with the ZX Spectrum being amongst those. Elite's open-ended game model and revolutionary 3D graphics earned the game a place as both a classic and a genre maker within the gaming industry. The game's title derives from one of the player's goals of raising their combat rating to the exuberant heights of Elite. This was one of the first home computer games that used wireframe 3D graphics with hidden line removal. This game was hugely popular as a result of being one of the first space games with an actual large universe to explore. The game is both detailed and complex. LUNAR Jetman. I thought this game would be an interesting side note to talk about, as it was one of the many great games on the Spectrum developed by Rareware, the same group who created a whole slew of great SNES and Nintendo 64 games. Games from this series are included within the Rare Collection on the Xbox One, and the full game of Jetpack can be played as an unlockable feature in Donkey Kong 64. The Spectrum's influence is everywhere you look, if you look hard enough. In this shooter video game sequel to Jetpack, you must destroy alien bases while simultaneously defending yourself along with Earth from a hostile alien race. Similarly to its predecessor, the player can move around slowly on foot or use a jetpack to leave the ground and navigate the moon faster. However, unlike Jetpack, Jetman has limited fuel, and this fuel must be topped up regularly. In addition to the jetpack, the player has a moon rover for ground travel, inside of which he is invulnerable to damage. However, the moon rover can only traverse smooth terrain, and Jetman may need to use bridging kits obtained from the rover to fill in craters on the moon's surface. This 1983 game is always worth a replay. So, that was some of the Spectrum games for you, which only leaves me with another bloody 23,993 games left to talk about on the platform. I could talk about loads more, but there is a whole world of Spectrum games out there for you to discover and explore. As I said, I never grew up with this platform myself, so even I am only just beginning to dip my toe into one of the largest gaming libraries in video game history. Obviously, with this being a microcomputer, setting up the system and loading up the games can be a bit tedious at times. But let us be honest with ourselves, it is bloody 2016! All games these days are a little bit tedious. You can easily boot up a ZX Spectrum game quicker than an Xbox One or PS4 game for the first time. So I think the loading times are a non-issue apparently these days to gamers. But, despite all of this, if you are too lazy to play games on the original hardware, there are alternative modern ways to play this software. Like the NES, the Master System, etc. You can emulate Spectrum games on a modern PC, eliminating all the old long loading problems. I wouldn't normally encourage emulation or piracy on my channel, as you are fully aware of, but the microcomputer era was all about bloody piracy, so why stop that now? After all, the easy piracy was one of the reasons I gave in my last video about microcomputers being a more sensible purchase than the NES back in the 80s. Everyone had bloody tape recorders. So, is the ZX Spectrum worth playing today? Hell bloody yes! The platform's history and library simply speaks for itself. It may not have been the most powerful computer at the time, but the platform's charm and legacy lives on. Even the Nintendo fanboys, who seem to have this weird jihad on me for revealing the real truth about gaming history and celebrating the NES's failings in Europe, all need to be thankful for the ZX Spectrum, as without it, in later years, who knows whether the Nintendo 64 would have been so successful, as we probably would never have got the likes of Rare on there, making games like GoldenEye, Diddy Kong Racing, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Banjo-Kazooie, etc. You can thank the ZX Spectrum for starting all of that too! So, neither this video nor my last one are debates about what system or platform is better, but more videos covering a number of reasons why the NES had little or no impact in Europe in the 1980s. I am not going to bash the NES itself, as it was a great system with bloody great games, but the ZX Spectrum, along with so many other great microcomputers, were one of the many reasons that Europe has a very different gaming story to that of North America. Who needed greedy Japanese companies dominating their domestic markets when you had great fantastic homegrown products to call upon instead? So, if you get some spare time, why not play some of the games I suggested and have a dig into the deep depths of the Spectrum library. Cheerio! Shoutouts to Jarrett Tolzian, Bricky's Lad, Mad Ape Productions, Andreas Larson, Peter Sidon, Diego Pereira, and all of my other patrons. Thank you all for your support and helping me to remove revisionist history. If I was the Queen, I would knight every single one of you. If you have yet to see my Patreon page though, be sure to check it out. There are some pretty cool rewards for my supporters. If you're brand new and enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button and be sure to click one of the annotations to see some of my other content. I hope you will join me again in my next video. I might do another part to this story next week. I'll see how I feel about it at the time. Ta-ta and farewell.